Thank you for tuning in to the Post Route. Here is your host, W. Earl Kitchings.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of the Post Route, the show where we dive deep into conversations about Black quarterbacks, both past and present. I'm your host, W. Earl Kitchings, and this show is proudly brought to you by Quarter Phi Back, the preeminent fraternity for Black quarterbacks and home of the prestigious BIP Memorial Trophy, the only award that honors both the top HBCU quarterback and the top quarterback, Black quarterback from high schools across the nation. We are thrilled to have you with us tonight. And if you enjoy our content, and you like to support what we're doing, and we resonate with what you love about what we're doing, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tap the notification bell so you can never miss one episode of the Post Route. Join us live every Monday night here at 7 o'clock for more phenomenal conversations. And let me tell you, 2025 is just getting started, and we already have a super phenomenal show for you tonight. But before I tell you about my guest, let me just make you aware that next Monday, our show, we will announce the 2024 winner of the BIP Memorial Trophy, the trophy that honors the top HBCU quarterback and the top Black quarterback from high schools across the nation. That's what we will have next Monday. I know it's National Championship Monday for colleges, but before you get into that, tune in with us, find out who our picks are for the BIP Memorial Trophy. Then the other thing, as we continue to build our network of guests, we want you to know that we are constantly building our merchandise line. So again, we are just working to make sure that you have an opportunity to be with us and support us in what we're doing. Now tonight, my very special guest, no, he is not a quarterback. He's like me. He's a sports historian, but he's a sports historian extraordinaire. This gentleman has appeared in media outlets including, let me just share with you, USA Today, Sports Illustrated, the New York Times, Chicago Tribune, the Washington Post, Time Magazine, NPR, CNN, Huffington Post, and the Rolling Stone magazine. He is a phenomenal author and historian, and we are very, very happy and proud to have him tonight. He is a professor at Grand Valley State University up in that Michigan area. So we are definitely in high praise of what's going on tonight with who we have. He wrote this book, The Great Black Hope. Tells a story about Doug Williams, Vince Evans, in that time when they became the first two Black quarterbacks at the pro level to play against one another in a pro football game. My friends, my viewers, my guests, please welcome my guest tonight, Dr. Lewis Moore. Lou, welcome to the Post Route.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, man, phenomenal book. Great work you did, man. Kudos to you. Thank you for putting in the time and having a vision of wanting to put something like this together, man. I'm only halfway through it, but my head is just spinning from all the things that you've shared in your book. Some of the same people that you talk about in your book, I put in my book, The Forgotten QBs. So I am just honored to have you with me tonight, man, to talk about Black quarterbacks as we both have become well established in knowing who these guys are.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. I've admired your work, and I see that you got a lot of tabs in that book, so I can't wait to kind of dig into this conversation.
And that's just in the introduction, man.
Yeah.
That's just the introduction, Lou. I mean, your introduction is so powerful because it talks about people and it talks about things one of the things that I had to make note of was that the pro quarterback was a symbol that carried weight in America, the pro quarterback. And then you went on to say that the caste system of the pro system that we have way back in the 50s and 60s, 70s, and even today. I mean, when you talk about a guy such as Colin Kaepernick losing his career because he did something he felt was important, his values, and he got red flagged. So this book, man, is a treasure, and I'm so happy to have it. So what put you on this mission? Because that's what it was for me. It was a mission. What put you on this mission, Lou, to want to write this book?
Yeah, again, thank you. So if you know my work, I one of the things I try to do is tell the story of American history through the window of the black athlete. And so, like, my boxing books from 1880 to 1915. So here we are, like post Reconstruction, earliest 20th century. I have a book on the civil rights movement of the black athlete. And so this kind of fell in line. Like, let me tell the story of post civil rights America through sports. And I thought the quarterback was the best way to do it. And it also happens that I love black quarterbacks, right? I'm just like you, right? Like yesterday's game, I'm torn, right? Between the Jalen Hurts and Jordan Love, and next weekend it's going to be a struggle for CJ Stroud and Patrick Mahomes, right? But I know who I'm going for, though. I know I'm going Lamar. And even though I got this Lions sweater, a big part of me wants, Jaden to shine, right? And so I wanted I know there's a lot of people out there like that, and I wanted to write a book that kind of captures that, but does it in a way that tells that history of what they went through guys who are familiar like Doug, and maybe not familiar like Vince Evans. Like, I think older folks remember Vince, younger people this generation have no clue who he is, but he changed the game in so many ways, right? Like the guys we see today, your Jalen Hurts, your Lamar Jacksons, that's Vince Evans, right? That's he's 6'2", running a 4.5 40. It's just that it just didn't work out because they didn't know what to do with him. So,
well, what my thought is, all these guys in the pros now are standing on the shoulders of the Vince Evans and Doug Williams. The Doug Williams and Vince Evans standing on the shoulders of the Jimmy Rays, Willie Throwers, Choo Choo Brackens, guys who did not get that opportunity, Eldridge Dickey, guys who did not get a fair shot,
right?
Because of the fact that they were black. No other reason, because the talent was there. But now that speed, and you and I both know that the common thing about speed is speed kills. And the speed at the HBCU level of college football in those 60s was way faster than what prime America had on the football fields at the major colleges. So as you see, today's football is kind of a microcosm of what the black colleges were, because hey man, you couldn't drop back and stay back there too long, because unless you got a great offensive line, and let me tell you, Tennessee State has some great offensive lines. I mean, Joe Gilliam, Eldridge Dickey, they could stand back there, man, 4, 5, 6 seconds with no problem. So,
right. Well, I mean, you think about it, like if you're going against Grambling, you're not getting that pass off because Ernie Ladd or Buck Buchanan coming at you, right? or if you think about those Tennessee State defensive teams, like we know them for Dickey and Gillum, but on defense they were even better. Like Joe Gillum Sr. is probably one of the greatest defensive coordinators like ever. We don't even talk about it, right? We don't talk about DCs a lot. But I think there's that one stat where he put like back-to-back secondaries in the pros, right? Which is you know how much talent that is. Or when you mention quarterbacks, like one way to think about it is in the 60s, you have like Willie Woods, who played at USC. He's in the Hall of Fame as a safety. Ken Riley, Florida A&M, he's in the Hall of Fame as a safety or quarterback. That's the kind of talent that they had and athleticism. And that was normal for a lot of these schools, right? And we, unfortunately, we don't get to see it because of, as you said earlier, that caste system that the NFL had in place.
And as you were writing this book, how much of that caste system just jumped out at you to the point where you're like, man, this time in American football in this 50s, 60s, early 70s, it was some really brutal things that were being done to make sure that these guys never saw the light of day at that position.
Yeah, to me it's sad. Like writing. I know what you're talking about when you talk about the introduction, and I name a bunch of guys you name. There's this one passage where I'm just writing all the guys from. So Choo Choo Brackens is the last like real quarterback to play in the NFL between him in 1955 for the Packers and Martin Briscoe in 1968. And there's this part in the book where I just write all these guys who were black quarterbacks in college and never got a shot, right? Yep. And to me, that's just like sad because these guys knew, like they knew that there was the position that they had played their whole life. They started in high school, they started in college. It didn't matter how good they were. They knew because of the color of the skin, they weren't going to get a chance, right? And so some guys switched, right? Like, okay, I'll just be a receiver my senior year in college. And unfortunately, and we see that like recently, like 20 years ago with, oh my gosh, he played at Indiana. Now he's the receivers coach at the Detroit Lions. Randall L. Right?
Randall L.
Right, he has a switch. Yeah, he had to switch his senior year because he knew that the league wasn't going to give him a shot. And so to me, that's sad. Like to see how talented, like guys, we never, in pre-show, we're talking Reggie Oliver, and now he gets a shot at the WFL. But my guy who, oh my gosh, just gave him my name. Who went to? You're the expert now. He went undefeated throughout his high school career, undefeated throughout college, and then has to go to Canada. Right, is it Easton or something like that, right? And it's
now, Lou, let me tell you, I got to tell you, I had a chance to bring him on as one of my guests early on last year, and to me, I just told him straight out, I said, Chuck, you're the greatest college quarterback to ever live because you never lost a game, and that was Chuck Ely, who played at Toledo.
Never lost. Yeah.
Never lost a game in high school, but he wasn't good enough to play for the NFL. He was from Ohio. He wasn't good enough to play for Cleveland. He wasn't good enough to play for Cincinnati.
Yes. Yeah.
Eighth in the Heisman voting his senior year, but he wasn't good enough. But you never lost a game. So when we talk about skills, okay, skills is one thing. And then as soon as you talk about skills, they want to say, well, the leadership, this guy doesn't have leadership. Right. Dude, what kind of guy can lead a team 3 seasons and not lose a football game? What kind of leadership is that on the field and off the field? So, yeah, Chuck Ely is that guy. And until somebody can replicate 35-0,
there's
nobody better.
And it's not like an easy 35-0 too, right? It's like a 35-0, still going with the fact that people don't think you could play that position because when he's playing, there's just, who is probably Jimmy Jones at USC and a handful of other guys.
Yep.
But for the most part, they're not seeing guys that look like you. They don't believe that you could even play in that position.
Not at all. Not at all. So to see some of these guys who were right here in Florida, i.e. Eddie McShann, played at Gainesville High School in Gainesville, Florida. Well, if you're a Florida Gator fan, then that's where Florida is. How do you have a top-notch guy in your hometown who's led your predominantly white high school on the field, who led them to a state championship in basketball, won a state championship in basketball, who can throw with his left and his right hand, and he ends up being the first black quarterback at Georgia Tech, not at Florida.
Yeah,
in 1970.
Yeah, it's one of those sad stories because at the end, if I get this right, he winds up leaving early, right? Just because he just can't take the racism that he faces at Tech, and then right, and then he winds up getting a shot. Like I know we talked pre-show, listeners, you should have been on pre-show. Like the guys who the WFL is one of those understudied thing. I wish like the opportunity to be able to write about that would be phenomenal because you have a number of black quarterbacks. I mean, can you imagine now it's a big deal where you have teams like the Pittsburgh Steelers with 2 black quarterbacks. You had 2 teams in 1974 in the WFL with 2 black quarterbacks, right? As Reggie Oliver and Eddie McShann and Jacksonville Sharks, and then the Shreveport Steamrollers had DC Nobles and David Mays, right? And these are just guys. Now Mays winds up getting a start for the Cleveland Browns later on and becomes a dentist. Listeners, don't look up afterwards because I believe he caught a case later on his pro career. But then you have Matthew Reed, who was probably just as good as anybody in college when he was there. What is he, like 6'4", 4'4", 40 guy throwing it with his left hand. And James Harris says one point the saddest thing he's ever seen was Matthew Reed having to play tight end. And he had to play tight end because he ran the 440, the 40 as fast as he could. And the NFL saw that and it's like, yeah, you're not a quarterback anymore.
Of course. I mean, and again, the mental aspect comes into play. So to see a Matt Reed, to see a Eddie McShann, to see a Reggie Oliver have to go other places, to see a Chuck Ely have to go to Canada. A lot of guys went to Canada and had a lot of success. Duffy Doherty at Michigan State, Bill Yeoman at Houston, they were pioneers from the standpoint of they didn't care what color you were as long as you could get the job done. So at Houston, DC Nobles did that for Houston, for Bill Yeoman. Jimmy Ray did that for Duffy Doherty at Michigan State. And sprinkle in these other teams that in the South, they weren't ready for it yet. But here's the ironic thing, Lou. Eddie McShann was just 3 years ahead of Don Gaffney, who became the first black quarterback at Florida.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about 3 years. We're not talking about a decade. We're talking about 3. He was right there. And then there was another quarterback who was an outstanding guy from Gainesville that didn't play for Florida. He had to go play at Georgia Southern and won them back-to-back 1AA championships, and that was Tracy Ham. But he was from Gainesville, Florida, but the Gators didn't want him either.
A lot of guys and the sad part is that's every state, right? In the South even, and it's like the quarterback's the one who has to kind of go away. Like once you get integration, the guys they're going to bring in the running backs, right? Bring in some other guys. It's the quarterbacks, like, you know, Vince has to leave the state. Vince Evans has to leave North Carolina all the way to California, or some of these other guys. I mean, just to talk about North Carolina is one of those things that doesn't make the book, but you appreciate this. A lot of those guys, if you look at the Minnesota Gophers, those early rosters, those black players, they're coming out of North Carolina because those local schools hadn't integrated. And there's this, I forget his name, but Minnesota has a coach who's also a recruiter, and he recruits the state of North Carolina. And he's the only white coach that shows up to the black high school game, the All-Star game. And that's where he gets them, right? Like, obviously Sandy Stevens comes out of Pennsylvania, but after that, like, he's plucking Hall of Famers, right? From the state, because none of these guys want them. And even later on in the 60s, the same coach moves to Rice. Boom, he gets him. He's like, North Carolina guys are going to start to go to Rice now, because the local teams, your NC States, your North Carolinas, your Dukes, your Wakes, take forever to do the right thing, to make their teams better, to bring on these better players.
Well, the pipeline for the University of Minnesota went through Sandy Stevens, followed by Craig Curry, followed by Tony Dungy,
right,
followed by Reggie Foggy. Reggie Foggy was from South Carolina. He was an outstanding athlete down there. So, yeah, the pipelines is interesting how the pipelines do work, but I'm just glad that they work to the point where we start getting these guys opportunities and exposures. Same thing with Condridge Holloway, who played at Tennessee. I had Walter Lewis on the show, who was the first black quarterback at Alabama. He got recruited. I asked him, I said, did Bear Bryant come to your house? He said, yeah, Bear Bryant came to my house and recruited me. And the agent for Walter Lewis at that time was his mom. And his mom told Bear Bryant that if you're not going to give my son an opportunity to play and be the quarterback, he's not coming to Alabama.
Wow.
So
that's powerful. Yeah.
It is. I mean, at that time, that's very
That's
powerful.
really powerful. Yeah. Because most people wouldn't have done that. Like so even oh my gosh, I wish I would have studied for this. He went who's so you got me. So
okay.
LSU, so 70, so the same class as Doug, Vince, and Gaffney in 72. LSU gets a black quarterback. Oh my gosh, his name's in the book.
Yeah, I remember.
He winds up being back in the NFL, and he coaches. Oh man, I feel so bad. But it's the same thing. Like these guys don't get the guarantee, and they wind up just like, oh yeah, you could play quarterback. And as soon as they get on campus, yeah, you're running back, and that's it, right?
Right.
And so for somebody's mom to say no, like guarantee my kid a chance, or he's not going, that's powerful because a lot of people just didn't do that. They just saw that like this is your one shot, this is your opportunity. You got to do what the coach says. And it's also the advantage of going to the HBCU, where they're going to let you be that quarterback if you want to be that quarterback.
Well, it's interesting because to say something like that to a Paul Bear Bryant, that's powerful.
Yeah.
Because Walter Lewis was from a city right outside of Mobile. So it wasn't like he was from the Midwest or up north. No, he was from Alabama, and his mother grew up in those difficult times in Alabama, but she had her son's best interest at heart. So to see the changes that have gone on with these colleges, and now, when you see the black quarterbacks playing out of Alabama now, you've seen the Bryce Young, the Jalen Hurts, the Milroe. You've seen these guys now, and it's like, okay, in doing some of my research, man, Auburn has had about a dozen black quarterbacks since 1980.
Wow.
And of course, the one we know that's the most famous is Cam Newton. But there was a Jason Campbell before him, and many other guys before these guys. So everybody's standing on somebody else's shoulders. But when we go back and when we start going back into the 50s, the shoulders of those guys are very broad, and they're holding up a lot of guys. One of the things that I really enjoy reading so far in the book, Lou, was the fact that you spoke about how that center line on the football field, that center line from the defensive side, from the safety to the middle linebacker to the center on the offense to the quarterback, that's a straight line. And a lot of coaches felt that those were the most coveted positions on the field, but you weren't going to see black players get those positions back in the 60s, 70s, a little bit through the 80s. How did you come to surmise that idea? Because that resonates so well with me. I'm like, yeah, that is a line right down the middle of the field.
Yeah, I think the line I use in the book is if like football looked as if Bull Connor was forced to pick an integrated team. And the reason why I said that, because the center line was thought to be not only coveted, but you're the smartest person, you're the leader, right? And so even in the late 60s, I think it's 1967, when Willie Lanier becomes the first black middle linebacker to start. That was a big deal. Like, we don't talk about it now because it's not the quarterback, but it's not until 1968 until you have the black center starting. And it was still few even after that, right? Like that 87 season when Doug's with Washington, I believe is the first time you have a starting black center and a black quarterback in the same game. Like they had moved somebody over to center who's black. And so that takes a long time to get there. And so, but when we get in the 60s, just because we're in that civil rights moment, integration is happening. And so I think a lot of people start to study it. And so there's studies out there, Sports Illustrated in 1968 does their shameful story of the black athlete, that's putting stats out there, kind of explaining these things. And then some sociologists looked at some things. So I was just able to kind of combine those stats that they had just to tell that story. But again, it's all about this idea that black folks, they didn't believe black folks had the intelligence or the leadership to play in those positions. Now, quarterback just happens to be the glamour one, so we talk about it, but same thing happened with the center and the middle linebacker and the safety.
And, of course, people may wonder, well, why is the center, considered to be a thinking position on the football team? But in the pros, the center calls out the blocking schemes for the offensive line. So he's got to know, he's got to read, and that was something else you pointed out in the book, that when these guys are playing, um, for some of these coaches, uh, they wanted these guys to be able to be fluid enough to read defenses so that they can make adjustments without you sending in an adjustment or telling them what they needed to do. So the caveats that you have in the book talk about speed. We talk about brains. Say, well, guys got put at cornerbacks because cornerback was a no brains position.
Right.
You don't have to do a lot of thinking because all you got to do is cover a guy. Whereas safety, you got to read and think and watch the quarterback and all these other things. Same thing with the middle linebacker. But we had guys who could do those things. And we had guys in the HBCUs and who made All-American during the Pittsburgh Courier time, that these coaches were just as intelligent as their counterparts who coached at the major colleges. And I think when you point out that Coach Eddie Robinson made a very difficult decision to switch and change up his entire offense to go from a wing tee or a straight tee to a drop back passing offense. But in order to do that, I got to have the right quarterbacks, and I got to find guys who are in that prototypical mold, 6'2", 6'3", ideally 6'4", big guys who can look over, drop back, stand tall in the pocket, got a good arm, can read coverages. So here's a coach who had a vision, a futuristic vision of what it was going to take to get his guys, because he was already sending a lot of guys to the pros, no doubt, a lot of them on defense. But he's like, I don't want to just send them there. I want some of my guys to be quarterbacks. And he started with, it started with James Harris, but I believe Mike Howell was before him. And then,
Matthew Reed and then Doug and then those
Reed,
guys,
Terry Brown, Como, all these guys were in between Reed and Doug. And then Doug is the culmination of all that work Eddie had put together. It's like, okay, I rolled everything into Doug. And Doug got frustrated because Eddie wasn't playing him. You got all these other quarterbacks who aren't performing, and Doug's over there pouting because he's not getting a chance to play. But he didn't know the scheme that Eddie had in mind. And once Doug fully understood what was going on, we see Doug as that guy finished fourth in the Heisman and became that name that became that first-round draft choice of Tampa Bay. But ironically, Lou, he was the second black quarterback to come to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Right, Parnell Dickinson. So one of the things you mentioned, it's like not just Eddie Robinson, but a lot of those black coaches, they're just geniuses, and we don't give the credit. So even somebody at Tuskegee like Cleve Abbott, like if you read up him on the 1940s, he's like, so well, I try to explain this. I don't bring up Cleve Abbott, but the change on the offense from a single wing to a T formation is what really changes everything. It's what I try to explain in chapter 1. But Cleve is the first black coach at HBCU going back to the T. So the T, if listeners don't understand, that's the original formation in all of football. And that's like quarterback behind center, hand it off to a running back and go. By the 1940, they changed that, right? That's why you see people to this day, that man in motion, that's the T formation coming out late 30s, early 40s. So you could, get a tell, and then they're going to drop running backs into flankers and stuff like that. Tuskegee's running that 1941, 1942. Tennessee State is running that in the late 1940s, even before Merritt gets there, right? Merritt, I want to say that Merritt grows up, John Merritt, if listeners don't know, grows up in Kentucky, and he plays, oh my gosh, I had this all written down, for one of the greatest high school coaches ever, and he learns his system from them, goes to Jackson State, and then when he gets to Tennessee State, he has this air raid. I mean, it's an air raid offense. He's running a pro-style offense, and they're so advanced by the late 60s, early 70s. Joe Paterno and Penn State are actually coming to their practice to study how they think about passing lanes. And so a lot of times when we talk about football, guys like Sid Gilman and coaches like that get a lot of credit for changing the game, and they certainly did. But at these HBCUs, because they had to be so innovative, because they don't have the money to hire like a million coaches, right? Even in the 60s, you have specialized coaches.
Yep.
At HBCUs, you're lucky 3, right? And so, and like you said early on, all the speed that's coming at you, you better be innovative, right? You better come up with something.
Yeah.
So these guys, whether it's at Tuskegee or Prairie View in the 1950s when they had Choo-Choo Brackens, they're running innovative offensive where they're taking advantage of their speed and their quarterback skills and their intelligence. And to the NFL, they're like, this is not enough. And so what Eddie did was like, okay, I see what you're doing, NFL. I'm going to show you, right? And so he takes the single wing, like I want to say 1957, changes it to the wing T. The wing T is still very, like, if listeners know this, like very heavy running. And your quarterback, so Iowa, when they had Wilbur Hollis, was running the wing T and pretty successful. And then Eddie Robinson takes it from Iowa, and he's running with Mike Howell. And Howell, this is how good he is. He gets drafted by the Cleveland Browns. And when he's on that Browns, he's the fastest player. So you imagine the fastest player was the quarterback at Grambling. He goes to Cleveland, he's the fastest player, but they don't give him a shot at quarterback. But Eddie learns. He says, okay, what we did in this original wing T with Mike Howell doesn't work out. Right? He's got to go be a DB. I'm not going to do that again. And so he hires, like we talked about this in the pre-show, guys like Doug Porter, who, as you mentioned, the pre-show goes, let me get this right, goes on to coach at Howard, right? And Doug Porter in the 1960s is known as very innovative on offense, so that's why he hires him. And they just start tinkering with this offense, like to create a quarterback, not necessarily a pro style offense, but the offense that fits them, fits what they had to go against, but also what the pros are going to take note. And so, okay, I got pro players on the Cleveland Browns, and there's also a white guy who's local there. Let me bring them back to see what Paul Brown's doing. I got pro players on the Green Bay Packers. Let me bring them back to see what Vince Lombardi's doing. And so he's adding in all this stuff on top of whatever they have to adjust. And then he's like, you know what? The pros are taking their guys. They're saying they're too fast. All right, my guys aren't running. And so if you look at those Grambling quarterbacks, they don't run. Like Harris can move. He's not fast, but he's fast enough for the NFL to think, well, we can switch him to defensive back, right? Matthew Reed, there's a story, and I'll shut up for a second. Eddie Robinson begged a reporter not to tell how fast Matthew Reed was, because he knew that if that information got out, the colleges would not think about him as a quarterback, right? He did not want that information. And Matthew Reed's a 4.40 guy, and he had him solely as a pocket passer. The other thing Eddie Robinson did was like, you had to be tall. So all these guys are 6'4", from Shaq Harris to Doug Williams. They're all tall. They're all standing in the pocket. He saw what the NFL was doing, and he's like, I dare you to discount me now, right? And when Shaq got his chance, he was one of the best quarterbacks in the 1970s. When Doug got a real shot, like a real shot, he was one of the best quarterbacks. His start to his pro career was just as fast as anybody had started their pro career, and it still wasn't good enough for the league at that time.
Yeah. Well, Lou, hang with me, man. I'm gonna take this quick break, man, and we're gonna come back and talk a little bit more about The Great Black Hope, your book. We're talking to Dr. Lewis Moore tonight, the professor. He wrote this book, The Great Black Hope, and it tells a story about Doug Williams and Vince Evans. So he's our special guest tonight. We're going to get back to him. But before we do that, we want to make sure that if you're interested in getting our quarterfied back logo t-shirt, hey, it's only $40. You can order it. Go on Zelle to pay for it, 904-994-2189. That is going to be the price for right now. In about maybe a couple of weeks, that price is going to change just a little bit. It's going to go up just a little bit. If you don't want the t-shirt, you can also order the warm-up. Warm-up is $89.99. Add a few more dollars if you're a 2 to 4X size. So those are a couple of the items that we're putting out. And then if you have not gotten your copy of the book, The Forgotten QBs, I'm going to say get a copy of it. But before you get that book, you got to get this book, The Great Black Hope by Dr. Lewis Moore, our guest tonight. Man, this is a phenomenal book. So all this is wrapped around the fact that we are Quarterfied Back, the preeminent fraternity for black quarterbacks. And this is why we have him on tonight, because he wrote a phenomenal book, and we wanted to just have him talk to you about what he did. So we got him tonight. We're going to get back to Dr. Lewis Moore. Lou, I want to go to something real quick, because your subtitle of your book states Doug Williams, Vince Evans, and the Making of the Black Quarterback. And I want you to just tell our viewers and listeners why that is such an important subtitle to your book. Lou, are you there?
Yeah, okay, you're breaking up. So, yeah, sorry about that.
All right. So I was just saying, your subtitle is Doug Williams, Vince Evans, and the Making of the Black Quarterback. Just share with our viewers why that's the subtitle, because you said a great black hope. And for us old heads who remember the movie with James Earl Jones, The Great White Hope, is about one guy, but you kind of turn this around. But why is the subtitle dealing with Vince Evans and Doug Williams?
Yeah, so first, like we'll take the main title. The hope is just this post civil rights notion of many Black Americans that merit would matter, right? And as you mentioned before, the quarterback's the most important position of all of sports. You're the person, and black people are kept out of that, right, at the NFL level. And so if you think that you're going to climb the ranks in society, and then on Saturday you see guys like Jimmy Ray performing, or Sandy Stevens, and then on Sunday you don't see guys that look like that or guys that look like you, you're like, okay, what happened here? Because merit doesn't matter. It's all about race. And so a lot of people put their hopes in the black quarterback. One of the terms is called the black quarterback syndrome. And it's for the quarterback, but also the person who's a doctor or an engineer or a business person who's at their job and just can't climb the ranks simply because they're black. And so there's this kind of hope in this athlete, right, that if they can make it, I'll get this opportunity too. Now, when it comes to Doug and Vince, to me, it just made perfect sense as I try to tell this narrative story. They're both born in 1955, right? At the beginning of, we'll call it the modern civil rights movement, right? So Brown v. Board was 54. By 1955, by the end of that year, you have busing, and then we're kind of still in that whole integration phase with the school system, and then you got the freedom rides and the sit-ins and all that stuff. And so they're growing up through that at the same time. They're both growing up in the South. But to me, what's so interesting about their story is that it's a different South, right? Vince Evans grows up in Greensboro, which is, for a lot of folks, the hub of the civil rights movement. That's where the sit-ins start. Greensboro, in fact, is the first city to say yes to Brown v. Board of Education the day after. But it still takes the 1971 till they bust, right? Because they're like, that's a no. And whereas Doug grows up in Cheneyville, which is rural Louisiana, with no running water for most of until he's a teenager, dirt roads, and the city, the Baton Rouge doesn't really care about these folks. But it's a very proud and prideful Black community. It's in reality, it's a community, right? It's the folks that stayed after Reconstruction, who stayed on the land, who knew that land ownership was the most important thing, and then ingrained that into people. And you even see that later on as Doug makes the pros, like, buying land for his family back there. And so to me, I wanted to tell that story because it's also a story of the civil rights movement, post-civil rights movement. And it just made sense because, again, born in the same year, grew up in the South, and then boom, college comes and everything's different. Doug goes to the HBCU, plays with one of the greatest college coaches ever. Vince winds up at the PWI at USC, plays with one of the greatest college coaches ever. Different systems, and they're on the same kind of trajectory to the league. But because they're different systems, different style of play. But they both play a system that the pros use, right? Like Doug is kind of, even though they're still one of a wing T, it's very pro style system at Grambling. USC is running the I formation. John McCain essentially invents the I formation. the NFL is taking that on. So these guys are actually going to be the ones who actually have an opportunity. Whereas like your guy Gaffney, Don Gaffney, he loses his opportunity when he goes to Florida because Florida's running the veer, and the NFL is not running the veer, and they're not going to let these guys in the league, which is unfortunate because there's a lot of talented guys running the veer. So to me, it just made sense to use those two guys to talk about that position, and then see where we can move from there, right? Like, and I still say, like you keep using the term standing on shoulders, right? Doug and Vince, as you said, stood on the shoulders of other people, and then the guys that come after him, Randall, Warren, even though Warren's their same age, he still comes after them, right? Are standing on their shoulders.
Yeah. So the other part of the subtitle that really made me kind of perk up was the fact that you mentioned that on one particular Sunday, Doug Williams faced off with Vince Evans in an NFL pro game to play against each other. First time ever, two black quarterbacks played against each other in the NFL on a Sunday. That just blew me away. I'm like, wow. I mean, you know, sometimes you see things and they don't register with you. Then you look back and like, oh, wow, I get it now. So that really caught my attention because I'm like, okay, that was pretty impactful. And the fact that Vince Evans was playing against his college coach.
Yeah. So September 30th, 1979, Bucks versus the Bears, and yep, Vince is going against John McKay, who one thing I wanted to write about this book is that McKay is an important figure here. He is kind of like he's Branch Rickey like. I mean, obviously there's been black quarterbacks before him, but the fact that he had Jimmy Jones, and if I'm sure your listeners know because they're super smart about this stuff, but he's the one who goes in, right? We always talk about Sam Bam Cunningham, but like I think it's even bigger that USC starting a black quarterback when they go beat Alabama in 1971, right? And he was a very good high school quarterback in Pennsylvania, comes out to USC, and he's the first black quarterback on the cover of Sports Illustrated. McKay also had Vince Evans for 2 years at USC. So Vince's sophomore season and Vince's junior season when he starts, and just this, to be clear, he's just awful. And then McKay goes to Tampa Bay, and within a year drafts a black quarterback, Parnell Dickinson, out of Mississippi Valley State. And then 2 years later, he's going to take Doug Williams, right? And so I don't think any other coach had that type of history with the black quarter in a positive fashion, right?
Right.
Now there's the negative to that, where the Denver Broncos coach, the same guy who started Marlon Briscoe and then cut him after a year, he also gets the job in Buffalo, cuts James Harris. He also, he's cutting James Harris. I think he had Matthew Reed at one point moves him along, and so there's guys like that who see the black quarterback. Yeah, you have no shot here. And then there's the McKays who's like, I just want to win, right? And see something in Jimmy Jones, Vince Evans, Parnell, and Doug Williams, where it doesn't really matter, what they look like. He understands they have the skills.
Right. And it's somewhat ironic, too, with the situation in Tampa as to what made Doug leave Tampa, even though he was playing for a John McKay who seemed to have favor in understanding the fact that black quarterbacks can get the job done. Doug left Tampa Bay because they didn't want to compensate him at the same level that the top quarterbacks in the league were being compensated. So he left and he went to the USFL. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard this story, and I know it's probably a mythical story, but the story goes that when he left Tampa Bay, Doug Williams' grandmother put a voodoo hex on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and they didn't win anymore, right? Ironically, the next quarterback behind Doug was another minority, was Jack Thompson, if I'm not mistaken. Called him the throwing Samoan. Jack Thompson came after Doug. But the story was that, man, when Doug got dealt that bad deal, man, his grandmother went down there, man, and put a hex on the Tampa Bay Bucks, and that hex didn't get relieved until Tony Dungy became the coach.
Yeah, that's I believe it. But you know, they did as you know, just to be they did them wrong, right? They did them.
Oh yeah.
I mean, nowadays we're used to, like, you know, guys like Dak Prescott become the highest paid player and stuff like that. And but even Lamar struggling for that contract. But Doug was done like from the get-go, right? Because what happens, and I detail this a bit in the book, he should have been the number one pick, like, because Tampa Bay had the number one pick.
Right.
They understood the racial climate of that time, that no other team, even though the Giants needed a quarterback, the Packers needed a quarterback. Now they wound up, I think, getting the Packers get James Lofton, and then the Giants next year will get Phil Simms. But they knew that they weren't going to pick a black quarterback, so they dropped back to 17 with the Oilers. Oilers picked Earl Campbell number one, but now when it's time to negotiate, now you're not the number one pick, so we're not going to pay you like the number one pick. On top of that, what they tried to tell them, well, quarterbacks don't play for like 3 or 4 years, so why would we pay you now big money if you're not going to play for 3 or 4 years? He started within 2 weeks of being in training camp, and
Absolutely.
so like his teammates from the get-go after he signs the contract, which is, you know, it's a lot of money for him from being from rural Louisiana, but his teammates looked down on him like it's not a good contract, and he holds out. And then within a couple of years, he's the 54th highest paid quarterback.
Yeah.
The 54th, right? Like, so there's every backup is making more than him, and then some. And it's total disrespect. And now you got to negotiate with someone. He calls him a racist owner, you know, Hugh Culverhouse, and you know, trying to get him to take like a real estate deal and all this stuff. And Doug, it's a powerful move, right? To say, you know what? I'm gone. Like, I'm going to USFL. I'm gonna take my money. Now USFL just does, obviously financially for Doug it works out, but financially for the league it doesn't work out. But Vince will wind up doing the same thing. You know, Chicago does him wrong. Okay, I'm going to USFL and be one of the highest paid quarterbacks. So you think about it. By the time Doug and Vince are there, the two of the highest paid quarterbacks in America are black quarterbacks. They just have to be in the USFL. And then the next year, when Warren Moon comes back to America, he's the highest paid quarterback ever. So just back-to-back years, just like that.
Well, it's always this thing of having to prove yourself, even though you've proven yourself, you know? And then when you look at some of the quarterbacks who have been bust, and the first one that always comes to my mind is a guy who won the Heisman Trophy and was a bust, and that was Pat Sullivan from Auburn. Okay. Yeah, he won the Heisman, but at 5'10", he was okay in college. Another guy, Steve Spurrier, good college quarterback, not that good in the pros. Not that good at Tampa Bay and not that good in the USFL. It was not that good of a quarterback. He was good in the Florida system. And that's something else that I'm sure we could spend a lot of time talking about systems in this day and time. And even then, if you're not in the right system, i.e. Justin Fields at Chicago, which comes to mind, if you're not in that right system, it's going to just eat you up, man. You're going to get either lost or you're going to get hurt. Our RG3 got hurt because they rushed him back in. Wasn't a good system for him. So these systems of these teams and these coaches also make a big difference in addition to the money. So when I see the Dak Prescotts and Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson making the kind of money they're making, I'm not mad at all, because there was a time when these guys could barely make money being the top quarterback. So now, you know, it kind of balances out, but it's been a lot of things that, you know, guys have gone through. And when we talk about systems and we talk about the fact that they had to go somewhere else to prove themselves, and, you know, you see Doug going to the Redskins, and Doug should have gotten the shot or the nod over Jay Schroeder, but he didn't.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
I think everybody knew that. Yeah.
Right? Everybody knew that, but so Schroeder gets hurt. Doug has to come in and man, sets the record for the Super Bowl and
Right.
validates the fact that, hey, I'm one of the best ever.
Right.
I'm one of the best ever. And
Right. And no, he's like, even in his early career, like I said, one of the fastest starts to a career, and there would be a lot of stuff like comparing him to Terry Bradshaw, right? But Bradshaw got the chance, right, over
oh
Joe
yeah,
Gilliam, and the
oh
rest is
yeah,
history. But the one thing when you bring up systems, it's like, look, in a month when Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson are playing for the Super Bowl, right? Because listen, it could be right, and let's just
yeah,
call it
yeah,
now.
yeah.
Those are two teams that picked a black quarterback that everybody said, "Oh, you're something else," right? And Hurts and Lamar Jackson believed in themselves, right, to say, you know what, I'm sticking with this position. But on top of that, the teams understood I got to build for these guys, right? Like so, the Ravens worked because they believed in Lamar Jackson. They built a whole system around him. The
Yep.
Eagles worked because they believed in Jalen Hurts, and they're building a system around to his strengths to take advantage of what he can do. And that's very, very, very rarely happens for these other guys before him. So I think there's going to be major changes, like because the success of Hurts in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, Lamar now, it's a copycat league, and so you would think teams are finally going to be like, okay, this is what we got in college. We don't have to we don't have to make Malik Cunningham a receiver anymore. He could play. And to me, a lot of this starts, we'll get back to the shameless plug of the book, is Vince Evans. And because when he's drafted, he does this. So Vince is drafted in 1977 by the Bears. He has it put in his contract that they cannot change his position without his permission. And so
Gotcha.
that first year, you're not, I'm a quarterback. Now he winds up returning kicks because the Bears like, yeah, you're not dressing if you don't return kicks. And
Right.
Vince is like, I want to dress. And so he returns kicks. But then it gives him the time he needs to develop and the time he needs for them to see his potential.
And time is one of the things that is so critical to the development of that position of quarterback. But it doesn't seem like time is going to wait anymore for these guys to develop. They're going to throw them out there, put them in these positions, and some of them do well, but not all of them do well. The injury part is when you start seeing some of the things kind of go sideways. But now that these guys are showing they understand contracts, they understand the whole system, they understand everything now. So you're not going to make me play something I don't want to play. You're not going to make me not be a quarterback if I don't want to be a quarterback. You can threaten me. Well, I guess I won't be playing then because it's not that critical anymore. I'm a quarterback. You don't do that to anybody else except those quarterbacks who are black. And so it's going to be interesting. But again, we keep talking about the fact that so much has come down the pipelines over the years and, it made such a difference. Uh, One question that I did write to myself to ask you, because I wanted to know uh, a lot of black high school quarterbacks, and I think when we came up, you went from one sport to the next sport to the next sport. So football to basketball to baseball, track, whatever. Did you find a lot of black high school quarterbacks who played quarterback in high school, played basketball in high school, but did not play quarterback in college? And the person I'm going to bring up to you forthrightly is a guy from my high school named by the name of Truck Robinson. Truck Robinson was 6'5". He played center on the basketball team, but he was a 6'5" quarterback for my dad. But he didn't want to follow into the footsteps of playing quarterback. He wanted to be a basketball player. Did you find many guys who kind of decided to make that basketball route instead of the football route and doing some of your research?
Uh, I believe Lou Hudson, is that his name? He played for the Hawks.
Yeah.
Uh, so he's a Greensboro. So Dudley High, which is the black high school out
Yep.
there. He was he was a very good quarterback. He was a high school quarterback, and goes to Minnesota, like that pipeline. And like, yeah, you're not you're not gonna make it here. But could you imagine, right? This Hall of Fame basketball player is like a high school quarterback.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those guys, but like you said, guys back then, everyone played every sport.
Yep.
Vince was a decent basketball player. Doug played basketball. Doug was. I think it's fair to say that Doug was probably a better baseball player in high
Then
school
football.
than football. And so
Okay.
he has one of the best arms, pitching arms. And what happens though, his older brother had played in the Cleveland system, Cleveland Indian
Yeah.
system. I think he makes it up to AAA, hurts his arm, comes home, and it's like, this is not for you, because you're not. What he understood is that you're not. He believed you're not going to get this opportunity.
Okay.
Baseball, it takes forever, and he's probably, I mean, if we could still count nowadays, it's very few black pitchers there. There was back then, there was a lot more, but the system that you have to go through to
Yeah.
make it to the pro, you gotta go
Yeah.
in the South. I mean, they're from the South, but you gotta go do all that in small town with no help is hard. Another name that listeners would appreciate, that was a very good high school quarterback that turned out to be one of the greatest pitchers of all time, is Vida Blue.
Blue.
And
Yep.
I wish there was film of this, but Vida Blue and James Harris team played each other in high
Yeah.
school football,
I read
both
that.
college quarterbacks. Yeah, I
I
would have
read
been
that.
like, man, I would, because they were throwing it all over the field. And I believe it's Yeoman at Houston said, yeah, this guy is one of the best high school quarterbacks I've ever seen when he was there. But Blue didn't think he'd have an opportunity to play quarterback, and baseball wound up being his thing. So, yeah.
It's interesting that you brought that comparison because for those who of us and those people who do know it, Allen Iverson was a phenomenal high school quarterback, but he was not going to make it at that next level because of his size. But in high school, man, that guy he was a ankle breaker on the football field and the
Right.
basketball court. So he was a phenomenal guy that, he took his talents to the best place because of what he could do. And then a guy from that same area, which was the Hampton, Norfolk area, Ron Curry, who
Right.
played at North Carolina, was also a phenomenal high school quarterback, but was not going to see it a lot of time on the football field at some of these schools. So there have been guys who can do it. And, like I said, Eddie McShann could throw with his left and his right hand. He shot the
Wow.
basketball with his left and his right hand.
Oh, wow.
And to win the state championship, and I'm sitting there witnessing this guy uh, win, and he was like one of two black players, and I think on that basketball team to win the state championship, and to see him go to Georgia Tech, it's like, wow, why couldn't he play at Florida? Well, Florida wasn't ready.
Right.
So it's been, just watching these things happen over time, man, and for you to identify some of these guys when I read that Vida Blue was a phenomenal quarterback in high school but decided to go play baseball, I'm like, oh my God, Vida Blue. And that seems like a natural maturation for a guy to be a good quarterback and be a good baseball player. Those kind of things go like a tandem, hand in hand. So
Right.
um, well, Lou, look, man, like I said, this is too short. I hope that we can bring you back because there's a lot more I would like to discuss with you, man, and bring you back again. But I'm gonna do something I normally do with the guys who are quarterbacks. And tonight, man, I'm going to welcome you to the fraternity and make you an
Amazing.
honorary member,
Nice.
honorary member of Quarter Five Back, man. And you will be a lifetime honorary member of the organization for us. And I'll get you your certificate and your letter. And I'll get with you a little later, and I'm gonna get you a T-shirt specifically for you, so you can help us move this thing along, man. Because we got a lot more to talk about with this black quarterback thing.
Man, much appreciated. I love what you're doing with this. Thank you.
All right. Till the next time, man. You take care, and God bless.
All right, you too. Have a great one. Bye.
All right, we'll do. Well, that's going to do it for us tonight. We got to thank our crew, Will Relaford, Kemal Lazir, Dr. Will Kitchings, and Ron Lee Kennedy for making this a great show. Till next Monday night, I'm W. Earl Kitchings. And as we always say here at the Post Route, go deep, go for the bomb. Take care, everybody. Did Lou drop off?